Some people spend their entire lives craving the simple warmth of parental approval, but 5 years ago, my own flesh and blood completely erased me from their lives over a single, calculated lie. My younger sister told our parents that I had dropped out of medical school, squandered my future, and hidden a web of shameful secrets from everyone. They believed her without a second thought, instantly blocking my phone number, ignoring my desperate emails, and skipping both my graduation and my wedding. For half a decade, I was dead to them, until a midnight emergency brought my sister into my trauma bay, bleeding out. As the chief trauma surgeon on call that night, my name was stitched in bold letters across the front of my white coat. And the moment my mother recognized me, she gripped my father's arm until her knuckles turned white. The illusion they had lived in for years shattered right there, in the hospital corridor. But to truly understand the weight of that confrontation, you have to look back to the autumn of 2019 in Bristol, Rhode Island. Growing up in our household, there was never any doubt that my sister, Chloe, was the golden child who could do absolutely no wrong. Chloe was charismatic, radiant, and effortlessly commanded every single room she walked into, leaving our working-class parents completely spellbound by her charm. Our father spent his days working hard at a local packaging plant while Mom managed the books for a small business, and they desperately craved the social status Chloe brought them. I was the quiet, introspective daughter who spent family gatherings tucked away in a corner with a heavy molecular biology textbook while my sister entertained the crowd. I never broke the rules or caused trouble, but my quiet compliance made me practically invisible to the people who raised me. When I placed second at the statewide science fair in the 8th grade, an achievement no one else from my school had ever reached, my parents skipped the award ceremony entirely to attend Chloe's community theater play. When I proudly brought my trophy home, Dad barely glanced up from the evening news, offering a flat, empty compliment before completely ignoring my achievement. I learned very early on to stop expecting their attention, so I poured all my energy into advanced placement courses and scholarships, hoping a massive achievement would finally force them to see me. That fleeting moment of recognition finally arrived when an acceptance letter from the prestigious Johns Hopkins Medical Program arrived in our mailbox. Dad sat at the kitchen table reading the letter over and over again, looking at me with genuine focus for the very first time in my life. He muttered that it was a real medical institution and remarked that perhaps I would actually make something of myself, a comment that lacked warmth but felt monumental to me. Mom spent the rest of the night calling every relative we had, and as I watched Chloe smile tightly across the dinner table, I realized she hated losing the spotlight. Once I relocated to Maryland, Chloe suddenly became intensely interested in my life, calling constantly to ask about my professors, my clinical rotations, and my daily anxieties. Foolishly, I believed she was finally reaching out as a loving sister, unaware that I was hand-feeding her every vulnerability she would later use as ammunition. Everything fractured during my 3rd year when my absolute best friend, Maya, was diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer. Maya had grown up in the foster system and had no family to care for her, leaving me as her sole support system through the darkest days of her life. Maya had literally held me together through my most stressful academic moments, so when she grew terribly ill, I formally requested a legal, fully documented single-semester leave of absence to become her full-time caregiver. I moved into her small apartment, drove her to grueling chemotherapy sessions, and stayed awake, holding her hand through the worst nights of her pain. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I called Chloe one evening to confide in her about the leave of absence, and she softly promised to keep the secret so our parents would not needlessly panic. 3 nights later, while sitting quietly in Maya's darkened hospital room, my phone buzzed with a late-night call from my father, his voice dripping with pure ice. He informed me that my sister had exposed all my lies about dropping out of school, and before I could even explain, my mother joined the line crying hysterically about my betrayal. When I offered to send the official dean paperwork to prove my innocence, Dad commanded me never to call their house again until I was ready to admit the truth. In less than 4 minutes, my entire family completely disowned me. Chloe sent a text message 20 minutes later offering a fake apology and a broken heart emoji, cementing my role as the villain while my best friend lay dying beside me. I spent the next 5 days frantically calling 14 times, but my parents immediately blocked my number and refused to read the certified letters I mailed to the house. Even my supportive Aunt Brenda tried to intervene on my behalf, but Dad hung up on her the moment she uttered my name, proving they were already conditioned to believe the absolute worst of me. I stopped trying to reach them on the 6th day, realizing with absolute clarity that my family had no desire to hear the truth. Maya passed away peacefully that December with only me holding her hand, and I had to organize her small funeral alone in an empty chapel. Returning to her apartment that night, I discovered a sticky note tucked inside her old anatomy book, telling me to finish what I started and become the doctor she always knew I could be. I wept until my chest ached, opened my laptop, and immediately re-enrolled in my medical courses. Finishing my medical degree without a family, an emotional safety net, or financial support required me to take out massive loans and survive on hospital cafeteria scraps. I became entirely relentless because patients still needed care, and exams did not pause for a broken heart, allowing me to graduate at the top of my class without a single relative in attendance. I matched into a highly competitive surgical residency at Hartford Memorial Hospital, a chaotic trauma center where I met a brilliant, fiercely protective mentor named Dr. Vivian Vance. Vivian caught me weeping silently in a supply closet after a particularly brutal shift one night, and instead of judging my vulnerability, she told me I was the strongest resident she had ever trained. During my 3rd grueling year of residency, I met a kind, brilliant civil rights attorney named Julian Vance, who listened to my past without an ounce of pity. When he told me that I deserved so much better than the treatment I received, I wept because no one had ever validated my pain like that before. We married 2 years later in a beautiful, intimate autumn ceremony. I sent formal wedding invitations to my parents, but the envelope slipped back into my mailbox weeks later, unopened and rejected once again. Julian's father proudly walked me down the aisle, and Aunt Brenda cried enough tears to make up for everyone who refused to show up for me. 5 years passed, and I earned the title of Chief Trauma Surgeon at Hartford Memorial, building a beautiful marriage and a successful life, completely independent of the people who abandoned me. Yet holidays always carried a quiet sting, leaving me wondering if they ever genuinely missed me. A week before my world turned upside down, Aunt Brenda called me sounding deeply anxious, mentioning that there was something urgent I needed to know regarding Chloe. Before she could elaborate, my emergency pager began buzzing loudly for a major trauma activation, forcing me to hang up and rush directly to the hospital. A reckless driver had run a red light on the interstate, and by the time I sprinted into the trauma bay and grabbed the admissions tablet, my heart stopped as I read the name Chloe Vance. My medical training immediately overrode my shock, and within seconds, the paramedics wheeled my pale, blood-soaked sister into the bay with my panicked, aging parents sobbing right behind her. Dad grabbed a nearby nurse, begging to speak with the surgeon, and when the nurse looked at my badge and realized the connection, I gave her a silent shake of my head. My parents were escorted to the surgical waiting area, while I scrubbed into the operating room, staring at my reflection and realizing the girl who destroyed my life was now dying on my table. I could have handed the case to another surgeon, but Chloe was rapidly fading, and I knew I was the most qualified trauma doctor in the building to save her. For nearly 4 grueling hours, I carefully repaired her ruptured spleen and controlled the massive internal bleeding without my hands shaking a single time. Inside that operating room, she was not the sister who betrayed me. She was simply a patient who deserved the highest level of medical care. After placing the final suture, I declined my colleague's offer to speak with the family, choosing to face them myself. I walked into the waiting room still wearing my blood-stained scrubs, my official badge clearly identifying me as Dr. Irene Vance, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Dad stood up instantly, but the moment his eyes locked onto my nameplate, he froze completely as Mom stared at me with a face drained of all color. I calmly informed them that their daughter had survived the intensive surgery and was currently stable in the intensive care unit, intentionally addressing them as Mr. and Mrs. Vance. My mother began sobbing, trembling as she took a step toward me, but I immediately stepped back. Dad looked entirely broken, whispering a question about me being a doctor, to which I replied that I was the chief of the entire department. When Mom stammered that Chloe told them I had dropped out of school and vanished, I looked them both in the eyes and revealed the truth. I told them about the 14 phone calls, the unread emails, and the returned letter, leaving a suffocating silence in the crowded waiting room as my father stared at the floor. A nurse stepped up to congratulate me on winning the Physician of the Year award, delivering the final blow to my parents' illusions. They were forced to see that the daughter they cast out was actually a respected leader, and as I turned to walk away, I heard my mother softly weeping to my father about what they had done. Hours later, Chloe opened her eyes in the recovery room, her face twisting into pure terror the moment she recognized me standing over her bed. When she instantly began calculating a new lie and whispering that she could explain, I told her she needed to explain herself to our parents before walking out. The truth fractured, their family dynamic completely, over the next 24 hours. Aunt Brenda arrived at the hospital armed with years of printed emails, medical school leave paperwork, and a damning text message where Chloe explicitly told her to hide my residency from our parents. Mom sat in the corridor reading my old messages with shaking hands, while Dad wept silently by the window, cornered by the undeniable reality of his own failure. That afternoon, my parents stood up trembling when I entered the room, desperately begging for my forgiveness, but I firmly told them that I was no longer the defenseless girl they abandoned. I established strict boundaries, requiring them to enter intensive family therapy if they ever wanted a relationship with me, a condition my father finally accepted without argument. Months of painful honesty passed, during which Chloe sent a mass email confessing her malicious lies to 47 extended family members, completely destroying her own carefully crafted reputation overnight. My parents eventually began changing, and during the hospital gala where I received my award, they sat in the back row watching me speak about building a life independent of their approval. Healing is an incredibly slow process, but today, my parents occasionally come over on Sunday mornings, navigating our new relationship with immense care and gentleness. Last week, Dad stood in my kitchen, looking completely out of place before quietly asking if he could help me set the table. I handed him 4 plates, and as he counted them out one by one, he looked at me with tears in his eyes, realizing he was finally being included. I never sought revenge against my sister because building a beautiful, successful life was the greatest victory I could ever achieve. Please like and subscribe my channel if you loved your family.